بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد قال فمن ربكما يا موسى قال ربنا الذي أعطى كل شيء خلقه ثم هدى. If you look around, humanity has never been able to exist without religion. It's true that some people ignore religion in all their lives, in fact. Some people, they're supposed to be of a religion, they're supposed to be Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or of any of the other religions of the world, but they have pretty much ignored religion throughout their life. Maybe once a year, maybe on some occasion, maybe during marriage, and so on. During the 19th and 20th centuries, for the first time in history perhaps, certain countries became atheist. It's a very new phenomenon. Certain countries became atheists, and others became secular. Not atheists, but secular. It's also true that some people, obviously, wherever they are in the world, they wish that there is no religion, that there was no religion. Today, maybe 5% of the world is atheist. Atheist means completely denying God. Perhaps another 10% is irreligious. And it's even true that religion, or rather the misuse of religion, has caused a lot of suffering. But it's also true that regimes based on atheistic ideologies like communism and perhaps even Nazism as such have caused even more suffering, despite the fact that they may have not been attached to any religion or may have been anti-religion. In fact, many of them often made religions out of their atheistic philosophies, that it became very militant, as though you must believe this. Absence of God means that do what you want. But then when you force everybody to believe and to follow, to dress in a particular way, then that's just a new form of religion without God, if you can define it as such. But it is clear generally that the vast majority of humanity loves religion, or whatever religion that may be, and has always done so. At any rate, today it is about 85% of the world's population of about 7.4 billion people belong to a religion, out of which about 2 billion would identify with being Christian, and about 1.7 to 1.8 billion as Muslims. And then you've got the Jews, and you've got the Hindus, and numerous others. So now the topic was, what was the topic? Secularism, modernism, liberalism. Was it postmodernism in there as well? Postmodernity. I've even forgotten what the title was. But to be honest, that title would put a lot of people off in the masjid. And the reason is that it's a very technical, very academic title. I mean, if you go online just to try to understand the difference between postmodernism and postmodernity, it'll cause your head to spin. Then try to contrast that with modernity and modernism, and there you've got four terms there that are very confusing. And they're not necessarily even agreed upon, though broadly they may be agreed upon. So I'm not going to be speaking on any kind of technical or academic level for that matter. We're on this 31st of December, New Year's Eve program for our, mashallah, our beautiful brothers sitting here, and our other brothers and sisters sitting and listening in the comfort of their homes, and also our, mashallah, our young children here who are sitting here as well. So clearly, I don't want to bore you. The food is going to come in about an hour or so. I asked that question first because I don't want to be a hindrance and an obstacle to your food. So let me just speak on some very general level of trying to understand some of the challenges all of this brings up. Now we may be understanding of some of these challenges. I want to just link some of the challenges that we face today to some of these concepts and ideas, just so that we get an understanding of what things were before, what kind of things are happening, and what the future possibly holds in store for us. Because as you'll see, a lot of these issues are quite complicated and very complex. Well, first and foremost, if we just try to understand modernity to postmodernity, it's a very general idea I'm going to provide. When you say modernity or modern society, we've gone past it, by the way. While some people still relate to that this is the modern age, according to many of the philosophers, modernity has passed. We're in post-modernity, right? This is just to give you an understanding so that we don't misuse these terms sometimes. Of course, these terms, they can be defined as you wish, but this is generally what philosophers see them as. Somewhat confusingly, modern society refers to what? Modern society refers to European society between 1650. How many years ago is that? That's 4 centuries ago, nearly 4 centuries ago, right? Or just less than 4 centuries ago. 1650 to about 1950. There's difference of opinion as to exactly when so-called modern society ends and post-modern society begins. So modern society is gone, right? There's probably a small few that still believe it's on, but generally, modern society is between 1650 to about the 1950s, some say up to the 1970s, some say even up to the 1980s, right? But clearly we can see that anybody who was alive around 1980 and has been alive since then, right? Those who are about 40 years of age, right? The millennials, they have a bit of they live in a different world, they just see a different world, they can't see much of a contrast. But if you've been, when computers had Windows 3.1 and a floppy disk of about 2 megabytes. Your phone has 4 gigabytes of RAM today. And we had 2 megabytes of computer hard disk. Right? That was a crazy time. Cassettes. Subhanallah. I mean, I don't even want to go into the vinyl records because I've never been one of those. But that does bring a lot of nostalgia back to a lot of people who are of that age. But anyway, you've seen how the world has changed massively. How you can store literally thousands of books on a small piece of hardware. Whereas before that would be absolutely impossible. The transfer of knowledge and all of these things. So that is modernism. That's basically the modern society has ended. Essentially, what is different according to the postmodernists is that those stable institutions which used to bind us together, they have much less influence now. That is what makes the difference between the modern society and the postmodern society. It'll become clearer as I continue. Now we have the rise of globalization, new media technologies, as I've just described. Individuals today are much more free to construct their own culture and identity as they've never been able to before. You had to conform before. And now you can have your own individual culture in your own home, within your own little group, a subculture as such. Some of the key features of modern society, and I'm only mentioning those that challenge us. There's many. I mean, I'm not. This is not some kind of exhaustive survey or comparison. This is just for us to understand that these are the things that are challenging us. If you look at a modern society, which was from 1650 to 1950s, people's knowledge became slowly more derived from scientific and rational thinking rather than religious faith. This was between 1650 to 1950, more increasingly so. People were already more inclining towards scientific and rational thinking rather than religious faith, magic or superstition. religion, religious faith, magic or superstition. Now, what we understand from here is that there's a good aspect here, but then there's also a very challenging aspect here. It's great that people don't just relate everything to magic, alhamdulillah. You'd have less jinn doctors around, right? Superstition is a bad thing. It's not in Islam to do that. Walking under a ladder, no problem. We don't believe, la tirata fil Islam. As the Prophet ﷺ said, if the crow flies, it should not be taken as a bad omen or sign. Though the Prophet ﷺ took good omens because they're positive. But anything negative he avoided, and that was prohibited. That there is no such thing. They used to use divining arrows in those days. They had different arrows that were marked differently in their tails. And then if they had to make a decision, they would pick one out. And if it showed a certain color, then they would take that seriously as a bad omen and don't go. Don't go on this journey, for example. Don't make this decision. The Prophet ﷺ said all of this is called azlam. All of this is wrong. It's all from the shaitan. So while all of that became something under scrutiny and viewed as suspicious, the problem is that religious faith, religious beliefs also became diluted, if not completely washed out in that regard as well. Natural disasters, for example, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, etc., they then tended to be explained scientifically rather than as an act of God. Now, what do you see as a problem with that? Well, you see, any miracle that happens, somebody may give a scientific explanation. For example, you know, in the time of Musa alayhi salam, when the community was afflicted by nits, locusts, blood everywhere, and the various different kind of plagues that overcame them, the scientists have looked at that and they've decided why this has happened. It was because of this particular reason. They've tried to explain it scientifically. Now, for us, the purpose of that was a punishment, admonition. That's what we look at. That doesn't have to be divorced from science. The fact that somebody can give an explanation of how these things happen, that's not a problem as such. We're not going to go with the explanation because that explanation could change tomorrow in the light of new research. Now, subhanAllah, look at this. How many of you believe that cholesterol is bad for you? Like, how many of you don't believe that cholesterol is bad for you? Let me ask you that question. Right? Cholesterol for the last 20, 30, 40 years, as far back as we can remember, has been a bad thing, the bad cholesterol, which comes a lot from overeating dairy products, butter and so on and so on. Just yesterday, in the Telegraph, there is an article that says that this has been the biggest lie of the century. And it's not. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol. I mean, I haven't looked at it so deeply yet, but this is what it's saying, is that it's not as bad as we made it out to be. Because there's people who get these clogged arteries and so on, they have completely sometimes healthy cholesterol levels as such. So that's just a simple example, right? That's just a simple example, but science can change each day. I mean, how many times in my life have they said, margarine is better than butter? And then they've turned around and said, no, butter is actually better than margarine. And now, probably butter is winning because of this whole cholesterol revision, right? So, what I'm trying to say here is that we can never fully always depend on scientific theories. You have to remember that. But we're not averse to them either. It's only when they challenge religion that we have an issue with that. So, I don't see a problem with something being an act of God and there being a scientific explanation behind it. Why do you have to say, no, this cannot be a sign, this is an act of God and thus there can't be any science behind it? Subhanallah. Right? Why does it have to be like that? There can be explanations of things. Allah could, this is a world that works in a certain way. Allah could just change the functions, the reactions, the quantum connections between things, and it worked in a different way, and then people have understood it. There was an exceptional case of something. Well, what's the big deal about that? So very different from Christianity, Islam has never had a problem with science. In fact, we had some great scientists, and this is not the time to go into that discussion. Number two, there's a widely held faith in scientifically based progress. As I said, Islam has no problem with science, so that part of modernity was not too much of a problem, except when people felt that you could not marry the two together. But as I said, the religion must dominate all the time. The religion must dominate even if we can't understand the reasoning behind something. The reason is that science could be changing. It's a matter of perspective. And today it's also a matter of lobbying to a certain degree of what really matters in terms of health food industries and things of that nature. Things are very complex. Okay, now let's just move on to the key features of the postmodern society, and you'll see more of a contrast. The difference between the last 30, 40 years and many centuries before that. Big difference. The way I generally explain the difference between the two is that if you look in 1951 or so, National Geographic did a number of good photographs. It did a photo edition of the Hajj. And it's quite impressive. Beautiful pictures. And in there, the shaitan is about this big, right? Or maybe a bit taller, right? It's literally a round circular wall, and it's got a small stump coming out of it, and that was shaitan, and there was a big Coca-Cola sign behind it. They both have to exist together for some reason, right? Though today you don't see the Coca-Cola anymore. But that was it. Then it became bigger. And now, in the last 10 years, look how big it's become. Compared to that size, it's the size of this room nearly. Subhanallah. Look how big shaitan has become, the jamarat, to be more accurate. But you know that small stump that was there in 1950s? That is probably what it was for the last several centuries before that. Not a change. And in the last 50 years, it's changed twice. It became bigger, put a few floors on it, and then subhanallah, it had to be made wider. Allahu Akbar. That is the change that we are looking at. Just that is very symbolic of the change of the world. So, the key features of the postmodern society, and you can trace this. Anybody who's 40 years or more, 35, 40 years or more, they can trace this. Number one, the media. The media has never been the way it is now in this period, postmodern period as such. Huge expansion in media technology, digital media, especially the internet. It's led to massive and unprecedented increase in the number of people using media, becoming engrossed, addicted. Huge increase in the diversity of media products. And with that comes both factual and fictional. This is the problem. Before, if you wanted to be entertained, there was a circus you could go to, right? There were, as a clown, that you could get somewhere or the other. And today you can literally sit in your home and be entertained to death. Literally. There are increased numbers of people. Everybody can now become an artist. Because you just do it. You have the recording. You can have the most high-tech recording equipment in your own homes. It's easy to purchase now. You can make a studio. You can have editing software. All of this stuff which had to be done professionally now is done in your own home. And thus we have more nasheeds as well. But we have so many other things as well. So there's always the good and bad in all of this. Music, video, profile sites, letting the public know who you are, what you are, revealing everything about yourself. One consequence of this is that our society has now become increasingly reliant, if not completely dependent, on media to tell us what is going on around in the world. Some sociologists argue that media creates something called hyper-reality. Hyper-reality. Something way above reality. An augmented, something with a catalyst that gives you something greater than it is. And subhanAllah, that is what it is. I have seen places which then I have seen in HD, with everything around it, and it, these curved screens and these, I don't know, these latest displays, you look at them and you think, I don't even think that kind of color, that vivid color, exists in real life. And I said, this is like better than real life. It's hyper reality. That stuff doesn't even exist in real life. You don't see it that way. So where we see in the media a different, something that seems more real than reality. We're living in a post world, in the sense of everything is post. It's post-truth world. Just to give you an example, when the Tatars swept through the Central Asia, major cities, if you look at the depiction of the historians, like Ibn al-Athir and others, the way they would explain is, these were events that no pen has ever written, no eye has ever witnessed, no mother has ever had the need to see. My fingers shake and quiver to write about these horrendous issues. The terror that gripped at people's hearts. It was all done in words. There is no picture book of anything from those ages. Today, it's all in pictures. And while it's a good thing in the sense that it creates something in us and it motivates us, it evokes our emotions. But the problem is that when you've seen too much of it, then it has to be more gory, more gruesome, and more terrifying for it to then affect you again. I mean, movies are like that today. Movies are the hyper reality as such. When you've seen that, then what does Aleppo make different? How does that be different to you? Now it's all in pictures. We don't rely on words anymore. And we're trying to create emotions through that. So while there's a benefit, one has to understand that there is a detriment to all of these things. Why am I saying this? I'm not saying that we need to go and abort all of these things and to abandon these things and everything. It's just for us to understand a reality. Do not consider everything that you see to be a reality. We're living in a hyper-real world. This is the problem. Another one is new networks. Now think about this. In this postmodern world, we're dealing with absolutely new networks that you would never have been able to create for yourself had it been about 50 years ago. This means generally profile sites like Facebook and others. You have created a whole network of virtual relatives, virtual friends, virtual connections. And in many of these cases, to the detriment of your real connections, to the detriment of the real people who are with you. You will discard them, as many of us do, because we're in our phone. Even in a meeting, you go to a wedding nowadays, and everybody around the table has to check their emails, has to check their profiles. In fact, forget emails and WhatsApp. It's the biggest fitna. It's the biggest challenge. Right? And you have to apologize, sorry, if somebody kind of looks at you. But this is what it is. This has caused, one of the consequences of this is that it's obviously created the breakdown of local communities. Right? Locally, you don't help each other as much because of being too busy with this. As people increasingly network online, not work online, network online, in the privacy of their own homes, they don't communicate with their next door neighbors. One simple example of this was that I remember I was in a post office once. This was actually when I was in America, in a post office. And I was waiting in line, and there was a line to get passport processing. Right? You can do it fast track in the post office. So same thing down there. And I knew the attendant in the post office, the one who used to work there. I've met him many times. Now he's helping the next customer. So he's helping her fill out the form or whatever, checking it out. And he says, "Hey, you're my neighbor. You live next door to me." He only found out that she lives next door to him because of the address. The door numbers are next door to each other. Otherwise, he doesn't know. This is the first time they have to meet in a post office. By chance. Subhanallah. The next point is fashion and music. These things have become so fluid and so changeable today as they've never been. Two of the most visible examples of the fast change that we see today lies in the music and fashion industries. Now, what do I mean by that? There's always been music around. But today, because of the vast consumption and how you can put your music or your nasheed with music, and unfortunately there's a lot of people out there who start nasheed very kosher, very nice, very halal, and then suddenly they think, what's the point? And you know, it's not about what's the point. I spoke to somebody recently and he said, I could make all of the sounds of music with my own mouth. You know what they call, what do you call that? Beatboxing, right? Personally, my opinion, and I haven't looked into this properly yet, and I am intending to, but my opinion is that anything that sounds like music and creates the same problem is like music. That's my opinion, all right? So I don't think beatboxing that makes you get up and do haram things and makes you jump around like an idiot, right? That is any more permissible than instrumental music, because at the end of the day, it's the sound which is a problem, not necessarily just the, right? You know, the duf was allowed because that was for, you know, either for jihad purposes, announcement purposes. There was a purpose for that. But anything that is going to pull at your heartstrings and give you a false sense of excitement, then there has to be a very good reason why you use that. Right? So anyway, there's you can see this online. You can see this online. You know, there's people criticizing each other, trying to get ahead of each other with all of these things. So people on media like that, in the fashion industry and the music industry, they have to constantly evolve with new styles. I've never watched this myself yet, but for the last year or two, there's something out of Korea that I kept reading about in the news. You can't avoid it. The what's it called? Gangnam style, right? Some special kind of dance or something, right? So these are just all new fads. They come in and then they will go. So essentially what the socialists are saying is that at the extreme end of this, you're going to have pop idols, nasheed artists, or whoever you know, or even speakers for that matter, you know, speakers giving Islamic talks, unfortunately, who they have to be made, they will be made a star one month and then it will be pushed down another month. Because it's all fan based. How can you trust fans? It's not about guidance, it's about doing crazy things sometimes. Right? Wearing certain types of garments and clothing, like, you know, like hoodies. Right? Another one, which I'm sure we can relate to, every one of us can relate to. We may not be able to relate to the music and everything, every one of us, or the fashion, but this one, the consumer society. There's been a complete change. We think of this as normal, that you can just go and buy what you want and get it as you like. Next day delivery, same day delivery. You know, forget next day delivery and Amazon Prime, that's old fashioned now, just about. If you haven't caught up, you're really behind. It's same day delivery. Yes, you pay a price for it. But the pricing structure of all of this is being tolerable, is becoming acceptable because you just want it, your desire. You no longer do you have to think, should I buy this? Should I not buy this? It's just buy it because they've made it easy for you to return. Most people don't return. They don't bother with the hassle of returning. Saying, let's buy it, we'll just return it when we have to. That's why you can go into Costco with a massive cart, bigger than other supermarkets, right? And you can put in toasters, you can put in refrigerators, right? And just buy them and then say, okay, if I don't like it, if it doesn't work well, I'll give it back. But most people don't end up giving it back. And then, worst of all, for Muslims, you buy it on credit card. You buy it on credit, and then a lot of people end up paying interest on these things. And that just takes out the barakah and the blessing and the pleasure out of all of this. Imagine you have a sofa that you purchased, and you're paying for it over 2 years. You never really feel like it's yours because you owe money. Especially if you're struggling. You never feel like it's yours. You don't have that satisfaction of the heart. And you got your TV like that as well. Your car is like that. Can you imagine? You're living on borrowed money basically. And then once you've paid it off and it becomes yours and you're supposed to be satisfied, it's old, it's worn out, it's finished now. As opposed to that, if you bought a lower grade sofa, something within your budget, a nice second-hand Gumtree Spock, what's the new one? Spock, yeah. All of the eBay, right? And you can find some good deals on there, you know, if you're careful, if you're looking for these things. Right? For example, IKEA stuff. You wonder sometimes why it's even bother going to IKEA to buy it. You get so much IKEA stuff that is virtually new, because all of these guys are buying it, you know, students and that, and then after 6 months, a year, they're sending it off. It's quite crazy, and you get it for half the price. For those who are savvy buyers like that. But all of these things, if you could save up and buy what you want, you get much more pleasure because you've paid it off, it's yours. Psychologically, you get the pleasure of that. Consumer society, the individual freedom of one's own lifestyle. One fundamental difference between the postmodern and modern societies is that our society is completely now consumer oriented. It's all about consumption, consumption, consumption. Consume, consume, consume. Think about it, that's all it is. Leisure activities are now more important today than work. Tell me, did you even have a single dessert place in London 20 years ago? There was not restaurants, there were a few halal restaurants, right? They ran out of options. They had to have fusion restaurants because just Chinese didn't work, just Indian didn't work, South Indian. You know, people, how does a restaurant even work anymore? Because people are so tired of everything. So now it's desserts. And not one dessert place, they're everywhere. You go to Saudi, every second shop, every second store is a perfume store. I've seen in the last 3 years, from the few perfume stores you had, you know, the Ajmal, and you had the Qurashi, and you had a few others, right, Rasasi, whatever. And now every second shop, new names, subhanallah, it's all over there. What does that tell you? Perfume is a good thing. The Prophet ﷺ, that's one indulgence, he liked good perfume. But this is just the culture of that. That's why one of the biggest, one of the biggest new markets in perfume, in the cologne, the Western perfumes as such, it's all oud oriented. Where did that come in from? It's from these wealthy Arab buyers, the Middle East Gulf buyers. Every company is producing this because it's just about consumption, consumption, consumption. Consumption and leisure activities. Even the Muslims like this are today. We have to take holidays. Well, again, there's nothing wrong with taking holidays. But the image of the postmodern society, if you look at this honestly, is that it's one of the shopping mall rather than the factory. People want to entertain themselves more than they want to work. And that's why the people with money, we have to have these new immigrants and new people to come in to do the job because the locals don't want to work. They want to sit at a desk and get unhealthy, unfortunately. This is all part of the new consumer society. Now, looking at this slightly from a different perspective and asking a few questions. Firstly, let's look at secularism now. Secularism, generally the idea of secularism is that no religion. Separation of church and state. The country is a secular country, which means that it doesn't have a religious ethos, a religious rule as such, right? Let's ask a few questions. This is now going into epistemology, or our source of information. Who decides what's good or bad for us? Who decides what is good or bad for us? What is moral or immoral? What is accepted or acceptable or unacceptable? So let me ask a very simple question. Why is it more wrong to cover your head than to cover any other part of the body? What is wrong? Why is it more wrong to cover your head for a woman, let's say with a hijab, right, than to cover any other part of the body? Many women, most women out there feel obliged to cover certain parts of their body at least, while they will reveal other parts. Why is that acceptable? And why is it more wrong for a woman to feel that she must also cover her hair? Who makes that decision? Think about it really on a very base level, on a very low level. Who makes that decision for you? Who basically influences your perspective? What is the line beyond which it becomes morally wrong to cover? Up to here, this much covering is moral, and then beyond that, hey, that's immoral, that's wrong, that's crazy, that's freaky. Who makes that moral decision? Why is uncovering your head, having no hijab, and wearing jeans, why is that any better than wearing a jillabi, a jubba, a full covering, a large tunic and robe, and a hijab on your head? Why is that any better? Why is wearing jeans and showing your hair more better than covering it up? What is the scientific reasoning behind there? Come on, if you're living in a time of science, what is the scientific reasoning? What is this? Who's making that decision for you? Basically, it's all based on custom and current social trend. It's what is analyzed, rather than analyzed, it's what's commented upon. It's what the stores show you. It's what is depicted online. And then you just have to have a few politicians and other Islamophobes and far-right people and others, liberals and progressives, that just criticize some of these things, and then suddenly you feel like, should I be doing that or not? Every community thinks that their custom is the most rational way or the absolute rule. Right? Every society thinks that their custom is the most rational way or the absolute rule. So when they see somebody covering up more than is generally covered up, then they think, that is strange. That is strange. That's why a Greek poet said, custom is king of all. Custom is king of all. It's what the custom is, you will have to conform to that. If you're weak, you will conform. You will not challenge. And then you will be demoralized inside. Because your so-called religion will be telling you one thing. You have an affinity, an affiliation towards that, but your custom is telling you something else. This is the dilemma that we're dealing with today. Muslims should really ask themselves, what is truth for you? What is truth? Who defines truth for you? What is the haqq? What is the truth? What is the ultimate source of this truth for you? Is it the culture and civilization that you live in, which is going to be constantly in flux and changing, as I will come to that? This is a very important question that will define your perspective. Honestly ask yourself, what is it that matters for me? Who defines truth for me? And this will tell you who you are. In this country, and in any Western country, for Muslims to survive, you're going to have to start questioning things. You're going to have to start questioning things to be able to contribute to the social paradigm. There are 1 million Muslims in London, which is about 1/8 of the population. And if you go to Oxford Street, it's 1 in every 3 people is a Muslim. Everybody from the person who serves you in Boots on Oxford Street, personal experience, to the shoppers in Selfridges and John Lewis and Harrods and the rest of it. That's not a problem, by the way, to have too many Muslims there. That's a nice thing. It runs the economy. Right? Questioning, you see, one is an idea and one is an ideology. When things become an ideology, you don't think about that ideology when you make a decision. If secularism and liberalism becomes your ideology, then you will just do things. And if you look at it from a normal person who lives in England or in America, he looks at a Muslim dressed differently on a Friday prayer, for example, or a woman who comes into work with a hijab on, he's going to think, why? Why do you need to do this? Nobody else does it. Why do you have to do this? And unfortunately, the media is not on our side, and neither are we doing anything to help to try to change that idea, to explain why we do things differently. What is the reasoning behind this Questioning such deep-rooted and blind assumptions may sound ridiculous to many and absolutely absurd. But if you say to them, they tell you like, why do you dress? You say, what do you think is the problem with that? Why do you think me dressed like this is any different than you? Is it just because everybody else doesn't do it like? Why? Where does your ultimate source of truth come from? Can you imagine if you challenge somebody like that? You never do that. Say, oh yeah, it's my religion, this, that and the other. Question back. Why do you say that? What's your problem? Who defines the truth? Who defines what's more moral? Challenge it. Don't be on the defensive, be on the offensive and ask the question. Because at the end of the day, for us to survive here, we're going to have to be part of this discourse. Otherwise, you're just going to be bashed on the head with a stick to say, you must conform. Essentially, that's what happens all the time. If such countries are to, because what you have to understand is that Europe has huge immigration. Germany has just taken 1 million refugees in. And for that, even France is going to have to change. There are so many analysts, political theorists, who are scientists that are already saying about France that their laïcité, their extreme form of liberalism, which is so extreme that it doesn't allow any kind of symbolism of faith or any kind of salient display of faith. It doesn't allow it. Yet it allows criticism of the faith. If they want to allow criticism of the faith and want people to get used to that, then why don't they all, I'm just from a secular perspective, why don't they also allow displays of religion? Let people feel comfortable. But no, the laïcité is too strong. It's become a religion on its own. It's become militant to a certain degree. Thus, you have them putting hijabs off, not hijabs off, actually gowns off women on the beach. That's extreme. It's an ideology. It's become an ideology. And they think that this is going to die out if they don't act against a religion. But Europe is going to have to really think about this. That in order that these millions of people who have another religion, see, Catholics, it doesn't make much of a difference. They have a few issues which are not very manifest issues. They're more about like contraception and abortion and things of that nature. Right? It's Muslims that bear the brunt of most of this because we have a very kind of overt religious identity. That's why Europe is going to have to really think about this. The Western world in general, they're going to have to really think about how do we foster a tolerant society that's really tolerant and make the Muslims feel at home. Thus they feel British or French or American or whatever the case is, right? And thus can be better contributors and we have less problems. This is something that's missing. The far right generally clouds the issue here for the moderates out there. And we don't help. If such countries want to be successful and prosperous, they'll have to accept this kind of debate and argument. And we have to bring the argument out there in a nice way. This is what's most important. Let's just look at modernity. Modernity, in its absolute free-for-all idea, has an immense amount of fluidity. It can adapt and change morning to evening, it can change. Everything is in flux. There are no principles. There are no usul. There are no fixed foundations and fundamentals. Everything is allowed as long as it doesn't harm somebody else. That is the only restriction you have. As long as you are not harming somebody else, everything is allowed. For example, the things that we are used to today in our society and have been forced to agree with, certain wrongs that we've been forced to agree with, do you know that in 50 to 100 years they're going to be different? Things are moving. They're going to be different. The current orthodoxies, current things which are considered to be orthodox, conservative, they will become unthinkable and outrageous heresies possibly in the next 50 to 100 years. You can look back in the last 40 years and think what has changed. and then just project that because it's only getting faster. The train is just going faster and faster and faster. And just see what kind of challenges lies ahead. Now you can have 3-parent babies, and Britain is at the forefront of that. To have a baby from 3 parents. Do you know how you do that? It's done in a laboratory. Right? It's done in a laboratory. Alhamdulillah. This is why, I mean, in all honesty, according to Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, he mentions that it's very difficult for us to engage at a very deep level, a conversation at a very, very deep level, other than just doing firefighting. Because when you're dealing with a modernity has no fixed principles, except, safety and rights and all of these things. Otherwise, you can do anything in that regard. If you look at the media, you look at songs, you look at artists, art. I mean, artists using elephant dung in their art. I mean, there's no boundaries at all in what you want to do. And, it goes beyond that. Right? So, for us to have a conversation, we coming from a very usuli perspective. In Islam, there are many fixed ideas. You can't do this, you can't do that. This is a fundamental of our religion. This is a fundamental of our religion. How can you have a discourse with somebody that doesn't have any fundamentals? Well, we don't agree with that. We don't agree with that. We don't have any fundamentals. Just basic fundamentals of rights and so on. That's why we're generally going to be firefighting. There don't seem to be any usul. It's just everything is endlessly mobile. Right? Even gender is fluid today. Even gender is fluid today. And that's why it's become so easy for the male to try out being a female. Right? You just stop, and when you don't like it anymore, you just stop taking the steroids or whatever they take. At the end of the day, nobody really becomes the other gender. They just have to continually take the medication to keep them like that. If they stop, then everything kind of fizzles out. So it's never 100%. Yeah, there's some surgery that takes place, that aspect, but in general, the hormones and everything, it's all based on a continuous administration of that. Right? The idea of liberalism was supposed to be tolerance. After Europe had had a bad experience with the church, because France, if you look at France, was a Christian country ruled by the church. That's what it was until, just less than a century ago probably. Suddenly, it's shed off that. And the whole idea of liberalism is supposed to be that anything should go, we should be completely tolerant. It's supposed to be a doctrine of tolerance. Let people do what they want. However, today it seems that the same liberalism in many places is unwilling to tolerate anything other than its own self. And I'll tell you some of these things. In fact, in some ways it's become very coercive, very forceful. You must have such and such a curriculum. You must have such and such a curriculum. You must hold these particular views about alternative sexualities, about gender. There's increasing number of boxes that you have to tick to say that you are British, though nobody really knows what it means to be British. So the whole point of liberalism was to open the horizons for people to think and believe as they wanted. But unfortunately, it's going against that as well, just purely from a liberal perspective. Today, there's a liberal inquisition in schools through Prevent and other things which have gone very wrong. Though it started off as a great idea for a good reason to keep people secure, but unfortunately, so many experts are saying that it's very toxic, it's a problem. There's an inquisition taking place in schools that you must be liberal. I mean, alhamdulillah, it's still better for us here than it is in France. But otherwise, you see that they're stopping people from they're stopping madrasas from taking foreign students, for example. Some madrasas, they've revoked their licenses. They're causing a lot of issues to certain madrasas. While some madrasas definitely need to, put their stanzas up, no doubt, you can understand that. But otherwise, just harshly coming down, asking young children about things that, they've never had to deal with before. Questions. Where is all this coming from? Is this supposed to be liberalism? Or is this forcing somebody to believe in a certain way, a certain ideology? It seems like the xenophobia in Europe, where you have this rise of the far right, right? Like in France and in other countries where the far right, anti-immigration people are coming up. It seems like one of the causes for that is, the traditional family values that we enjoyed have all been deteriorated because of all of these postmodern ideas that we just spoke about. People feeling nostalgic. People feeling, where can we get this back? They then see these foreigners, these immigrants who look different and say, these guys are spoiling our country. Whereas it's got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with immigrants. Just a few other points to wrap up. For the European Muslim, or the American Muslim, the Western Muslim, right? If we talk about, because we're all sharing the same kind of thing, just in different intensities and proportion, different challenges slightly. Someone who's brought up in one of these countries in which we find ourselves in, mashallah, right? And I'm proud to be a British Muslim. I have no problem with that, right? And I don't think that should be an issue. Allah has brought us here for a reason, and we should be proud of that. This is our country, and mashallah, you feel at home here, right? One of the challenges, though, for anybody who's born in this country, for example, if they take this country, is that you're going to have, no doubt, you're going to have a European cognitive framework. The way you see things is going to be very European, even if you are a practicing Muslim. And there's nothing wrong with that, to a certain level. There's nothing wrong with that, to look at things. We enjoy a lot of freedom. We enjoy a lot of fairness. We enjoy that our work can be done without us having to pay a bribe, or to have a wasita, or a connection, or having to go and get 10 signatures before anything goes. And it's crazy in some of these countries. There's one country that I studied in, and if you stay more than a certain number of weeks or whatever, you have to get a visa to come out, which takes nearly half a day to process. What they call a khuruj, an exit visa. And you don't get that at the airport. You have to go into the local office, and then you have to go there and fill in a form and pay some money and buy a ticket and all the rest of it. And then after that, one guy will sign it. Then you go to another guy and he doesn't even look at it, he signs it. And then another guy has to sign it. And if any of these signatures are missing, then you're in trouble. This is so much bureaucracy. Alhamdulillah, Allah has made it so much easy for us. It's so easy. So we're used to this framework. So we have a European framework. Things are easier, right? Because the only thing that people who are born here have to deal with is the Islamic paradigm, right? And the European paradigm. Just two paradigms, you have to try to bring them together. Let's just say the Western paradigm and the Islamic paradigm. It's easier. But you know who it's more difficult for? Those who are not born in this country, who started off in another country, especially India, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, wherever else it is, right? Afghanistan, right? If I'm missing anybody, let me know, right? Nigeria, Ghana, whatever it is, right? Wherever people are from. And then you come here, now you've got Indian, Nigerian cognitive framework, British, Western, you have to deal with that, and Islamic. How do you throw all of those three together and deal with it? It's a lot more. That's why you see that there's a massive difference between the first generation and the second generation. So much difference. Not just the way they speak, but just the way they view things. Because of the framework. There's still a lot of village in people, right? Even if they've moved to London. If they've come from a village, for that matter. Right? What do we do in this case? How do we deal with this? This is a culture of me, I, consumerism, greed, immediate gratification, instant gratification, absorption of indulgence in whatever possibilities of pleasure there may be out there. That which was open just to the higher ranking people, that which was just accessible to the royalty of the past centuries is accessible to us today. What we need to come back to at the end of the day is that we have an akhirah to go to. So with all of this so-called ease and this framework we're in, what we have to remember is that there's a God we have to stand in front of. Everything, the whole smart system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been put into place. We are all chipped by a chip of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that records everything that we do. We are smart bodies even before this word was created in the Western world. That our heart is chipped with a particular chip that we can't even see. That technology doesn't even exist in this world. وَحُصِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. That which is in the heart will be disclosed. يَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارًا. The ground, the earth beneath our feet is so well chipped that everything we do is tracked. Just like Google Fit tracks where you go, right? And Google Photo will tell you exactly where you've been even if you don't know where you've been, right? By the photos you take, right? Because this happened recently. I was in Jordan. We went and saw this palace, this fort. Took some pictures, and Google Photos is telling me this is so and so fort. I was like, okay, I forgot the name, right? The ground is chipped that on the day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا بِأَنَّ رَبَّكَ أُوحَى. In fact, every limb of ours is chipped with sensors. Such as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says again in the Quran, that people will say to their limbs that what is wrong with you? They will say, أَنْتَقَنَ اللَّهِ الَّذِي أَنْتَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Our Lord, your Lord has caused us to speak. Allah has caused us to speak, who caused everything to speak. All of this system, and today we can understand that from the smart home where the fridge, the lights, everything is connected, the doorbell. You could be in another country and see who's at your door, because there's these special doorbells you can get, right? This is all the modern world we're living in, but it tells us how everything Allah can watch. Inna rabbaka labil mirsad. Your Lord is in close watch. Mirsad is somebody who's watching very closely, not just looking at 10 screens at once. Allah sees everything at once, individually. And that's the Lord we have to stand in front of. We have to avoid the greed. We have to avoid the indulgence, because it is only harmful and it is detrimental, whether that be the food consumption, whatever it may be. We enjoy the world because we have to live in it. This is our way of getting to the hereafter. But at the end of the day, we do have a reality. There is a reality that we're going to have to stand up to, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why all of these things have just been mentioned to open up our eyes, that it is not what it all seems. There's a understanding that we have to have as how to approach these things. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to understand these things, give us divine insight, firasa, because a believer needs that divine intuition to see what's right and wrong. May Allah assist us and do not allow us to be overcome by our souls. لا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين, even for the blink of an eye. And Allahumma alhimna rushdana. Oh Allah, inspire us with our guidance. Which path I should take for myself and for my children, for my community. These are the du'as that we need to make. And above all, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابُ. Oh Allah, oh my Lord, our Lord, do not cause our hearts to deviate after you have given them guidance. Don't allow them to become crooked. Numerous du'as of that. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ash-shakki fil haqqi ba'da al-yaqeen. Oh Allah, I seek your refuge from doubt with regards the truth after having had conviction. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hawri ba'da al-kawr. Oh Allah, I seek your refuge from turning from a good state into an evil state, from being changed into transformed into a different state. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us closer to Him, and may Allah make the best of our days the day that we stand in front of Him. and may Allah allow us to understand and to benefit ourselves, benefit others in this world. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. We'll make a short dua and then inshallah. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام اللهم يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك نستغيث اللهم يا حنان يا منان لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Oh Allah, we ask you for your divine mercy. Oh Allah, we ask you for your compassion. Oh Allah, we ask you for your forgiveness. Oh Allah, we ask you to make our hearts the way you want them to be. Oh Allah, we want you to make our actions those that please you. Oh Allah, we ask you for protection from evil actions. Oh Allah, many things have become part and parcel of our life that are of disobedience to you. Oh Allah, we have come to a point where we sometimes don't even know what wrongs we are doing. Though we may be doing so much wrong, oh Allah, we ask you for understanding. We ask you for guidance. We ask you to make us force for good in this world. Oh Allah, to grant us the light in our hearts and the light in front of us and around us. Oh Allah, we ask you to assist us and help us and protect us and our children from all of the challenges that are out there. Oh Allah, we ask you to protect us and keep us steadfast. Oh Allah, keep us steadfast on our faith. Oh Allah, we ask you to bless our teachers. Oh Allah, to bless our students. Oh Allah, to bless our families. And oh Allah, we ask you that you send your abundant blessings on our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Oh Allah, this year has ended. Another year is come about. We mention the year because this is the frame of reference that we use. Oh Allah, every day really is the same for us, regardless of whether it be January or February. These are just dates. Oh Allah, our death could be written on any of these days. And oh Allah, the main thing for us is that you take us from this world in a way that we are satisfied with you and you are satisfied with us. Oh Allah, make our endings a good ending. Oh Allah, make our ending a good ending. Grant us a beautiful sealing state. Oh Allah, grant us a beautiful sealing state. Allow us to repent. Allow us to repent and return to you and be free of all sins before we depart this world. Oh Allah, bless all of those who have established this masjid and who have these programs here and who work hard to keep the masjid, oh Allah, in the way it is. And oh Allah, grant them great success in all of their endeavors and their ambitions and goals. And oh Allah, also protect all of the other masajid as well. And oh Allah, we ask you to fulfill and help and assist us with our permissible goals, oh Allah, and our permissible needs, and remove our sicknesses and illnesses of both the exterior and the interior illnesses. Oh Allah, we ask you for your assistance. Oh Allah, we ask you for your assistance. Oh Allah, we ask you for your barakah and blessing. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.